Well, you know, it's all right for me because now I can go for a cup of coffee and talk to friends. But it's not all right for Julian, who still suffers from malice and, well...
I think most people are now intensely angry that this huge miscarriage of justice.
The actions that have been taken by Julian were of a political nature, and this is a political prosecution.
Well, in general, as a journalist, I can only say this. If we are going to leave it up to the dark powers to define what is news, what is in the public interest, we can forget about democracy, we can forget about civil society. We are not leaving that up to them. We as citizens, we have the right to know. It is the only way forward in a society to secure people's right to know. And this is what it's all about. It's about the truth and about the exposure of the truth. Without it, we will simply be living in darkness. There will be simply no difference from these Western countries that adhere to this or any authoritarian regime that we seem to be all too easy to condemn on a daily basis.
Shocked to find out that our court observer has been denied access to the court online. This is almost his bread and butter. We conduct trial monitoring all over the world, week in, week out, and indeed are recognized internationally as an accredited international fair trial observer.
Anybody that discloses a torture program, the atrocity of a systematic killing program by the US is deemed to be threatening national security. That doesn't say anything about justice or common sense. It simply says where we are, where the US government is defining their interests. It's their interests, but our interests, the general public, are very different. We're tortured by the CIA, the American military, and those who were assassinated as part of the assassination program that was revealed in the WikiLeaks documents. Nothing of this is news to us. This is the reason why this was published in the first place. The public interest of having this exposed is overwhelming, and nobody should be in any doubt of the importance of us to know about these horrors. And it is, of course, very good to know that some of these documents have led to justice. So Julian and his lawyers get ample time to prepare. That is denying him of all his rights to defend for his life. That is a gross violation, and it needs to be addressed upon appeal and on every level it can be found. This is no justice. This is no justice at all.
We're here from Reporters Without Borders. This morning we actually tried to deliver a petition to 10 Downing Street with more than 80,000 signatures calling on the UK authorities not to extradite Julian Assange. They would not accept it from us because British democracy is currently closed due to COVID measures. So we have brought instead here to the court a banner with more than 80,000 names of everybody who's called on our government not to extradite Julian Assange.
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies.
Quite a number of federal prosecutors had refused to take the case or had entered objections, were very disconcerted at this attack on the First Amendment. Plainly, those prosecutors who are pursuing the case are federal prosecutors whose political views fit in with this kind of prosecution, but they are a minority. It doesn't make them necessarily corrupt or dishonest. It does make them driven by a particular political agenda, and I thought that came out.
Well, his conclusion is that the actions that have been taken by Julian were of a political nature, and this is a political prosecution.
That Julian Assange is being prosecuted for his political opinions, and that he is a man with a coherent political philosophy expressed in books and speeches over periods of years, and that it is his political views that the government of the United States really objects to.
Well, I think that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks are a necessity. But one thing that I'd like to point out to you in that question you asked is that in the cables, there was a cable which evidenced that a whole family had been murdered.
He's in prison because of what he's done for the world. With the journalism of WikiLeaks and Julian has shaken the world.
The U.S. government, first under Obama and now under Trump, has wanted to prosecute Assange and WikiLeaks for a long time, not because of anything relating to the 2016 election, but because of the publications in 2010 of the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs, as well as the diplomatic cables provided to them by Chelsea Manning.
Part of a wider attack on journalism, a wider attack on freedom of the media, and Mr. Timms put that over very, very well.
Because journalists always try and help their sources evade detection. It's not only the right of a journalist to do that, but the duty. Like if you go to the New York Times and the Washington Post front page today, you'll see instructions on how people can leak information to those newspapers using encryption and other kinds of programs without getting caught.
He knows the regulations and laws in the US Constitution and Supreme Court supporting free speech, and pointed out that the prosecutor was mistaken, more than mistaken, misleading.
The powerful, obviously the establishment, are after him and after all the WikiLeaks, not just Julian.
Well, under British law, as is true for the extradition law of most countries, you cannot be extradited for crimes that are political in nature. Countries won't send you to some other place if you're being persecuted for a political crime.
He's the most humble and warm human being, and his intelligence, you name it, is absolutely is the best that the society could have.
Yeah, the Department of Defense made plain in the Chelsea Manning case that nobody had in fact been harmed. There was no evidence of anybody being harmed. Someone in the court is being tested for COVID, so they suspended the session while they find out whether that person has COVID and whether then everyone else will be tested or how they will then proceed. But that's the court adjourned until Monday, so there'll be no further progress until then.
One decision! One decision! One decision!
Then finally, a very important matter, that the change of approach upon the assumption to power of the Trump administration. The Obama administration decided, along with the prosecutors in the Department of Justice, not to pursue, not to charge Julian because it embarrassed the First Amendment. That changed when Trump came to power, and in particular Mike Pompeo heading up the CIA.
I think too few journalists have woken up to the fact that this really is the sort of freedom of speech. It is the case of our times relating to the ability of journalists to report on things that governments don't want us to hear. And if our job is to, try and hold power to account, if Julian is sent to America, then the implications for newspapers and other journalists are absolutely immense. It's terrifying.
That they only wanted to hear part of his testimony, and they are objecting to the fact that objecting to the witnesses be able to talk about being tortured by the CIA.
Julian Assange! Please! Julian Assange! Please! You will be free!
this afternoon. It was Thomas Durkin. He's an American lawyer from Chicago, and he covered the area of penalties and plea bargaining cooperation. So they give you 175 years, but say if you give up all the names of the WikiLeaks staff and sources, then you only get 100 years or whatever absurdity they propose. The nomination of sources is a controversial problem for journalists. You never nominate your sources, you always protect them.
I'm very worried about Julian's health. I'm worried about the strain on him. He's had some level of incarceration now, well, really since 2010. I think the pressure on him is enormous. I think the sense that he's not receiving a fair trial and the sense of injustice. He's been kept in solitary confinement for far, far too long now. I think this is what really worries me, is the effect it's having on him personally. I think he overwhelmingly feels a sense of injustice for somebody who gets out of bed every morning, or that's what he did, feeling he was doing a public service.
This morning we heard from John Goetz from Der Spiegel about his experience working on the redaction and then publication of the documents. A few points of interest from this morning. He was very adamant that WikiLeaks had not published first the unredacted diplomatic cables, but had republished it, that they were first published by other media and other outlets.
What also worries me is in prison during lockdown, during the COVID crisis, he hasn't had proper access to his lawyers. He hasn't got proper access to a telephone. He complained about this. He phoned me a couple of months ago and he complained about the difficulty he had in trying to follow the news about his case, communicate with his lawyers. And of course that goes back to the way a Spanish contractor was actually spying on him and his lawyers in the Ecuadorian embassy. So there seem to me to be so many irregularities with the way these things are conducted that you do have to wonder whether there's one rule for Julian and people who challenge government to the extent he has, and another rule for ourselves. And I think that's a fundamental flaw in the way we all believe our justice system should be run.
Julian Assange, right now, today, is in court in the UK fighting an extradition trial to the United States. For those who don't remember, this is the guy who's the head of WikiLeaks, right? And he really fell out of favor in 2016 because he published the Hillary emails and everything like that, or Podesta emails. But he's not being charged for that. The extradition trial has nothing to do with that. Actually, the U.S. government, under William Barr, right, the current Attorney General, is trying to extradite this guy and put him in prison for the rest of his life for the best work that WikiLeaks ever did. That has won awards in every country basically around the planet, including the United States, which is the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs, right? Detainee records in Guantanamo Bay, things that are about explicit war crimes and abuses of power, torture and people who were killed who shouldn't have been killed, violations of use of force protocols, and all of these things, right? And this could all be made to go away if William Barr, the Attorney General, simply dropped the charges. And he should. Why isn't he?
Julian Assange has literally been tortured. I mean, the guy was locked in that embassy for how many years with no exposure to daylight, just completely trapped. And you've seen videos of him skateboarding around the embassy. I mean, he looks like he's going crazy in there. And now he's in jail and on trial.
Most cases where there's a national security case, they turn up a guilty plea. I think there's only 6 that haven't. But overall, there's never been a case in the United States where a publisher has been prosecuted for publishing national security items. Never been a case. This is the first one.
Your secrets keep me peaceful. Your lies keep me safe. You are satisfied with my ignorance. And you are in control. But, we are aware. We remember. Collateral murder.
Come on, fire!
200,000 innocent dead civilians in Iraq. Creeping mass surveillance. The censoring of our brothers and sisters. The free press being destroyed. The corruption of the powerful. The apathy of the neutered masses. The silencing of the vocal minority. Today, July 3rd is the 49th birthday of our brother, journalist Julian Assange, who once said, "Knowledge has always flowed upwards to bishops and kings, not down to serfs and slaves." Today is the day we remind you of the situation we are all in. It is not just Julian Assange that is imprisoned, it is our entire press freedom that is under attack. And it is also a day to reflect on the great achievements of WikiLeaks, including, but not limited to, the publication of the Afghan and Iraq war logs, which exposed US war crimes during the Iraq War, and Vault 7, which exposed CIA spying techniques used against citizens. This is information that would have never been made public without the work of Julian Assange.
WikiLeaks has revealed millions of secrets that governments and corporations want to hide from you. The list of revelations is long.
WikiLeaks revelations over the past 13 years have changed our perception of the world around us, and it has changed how we consume information. WikiLeaks provided, and still provides, a platform for every individual to speak up against the powerful. It offers a way to anonymously inform the public about what takes place in secret. As of July 3, 2020, Assange has been in detention for 2,937 days and imprisoned in Belmarsh for 450 days. Historically, Anonymous has been a voice for the voiceless. And we must hold up to that promise. With this call to action, we ask that the entire Anonymous collective stand in solidarity with Julian Assange. Not just today, but every day until he is free again. For as long as he cannot speak for himself, we must be his voice. At the same time, we must help those who continue to expose the crimes of the corrupt and the elite. Do not wait for anyone to come save you. We are on the front lines and your help is needed right now. Join us. We are Anonymous. We are Legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.
We are Anonymous.
I've been here witnessing outside the Old Bailey for the whole trial, and back in February up at the Woolwich Crown Court. From what we've been told today, the defence witnesses were giving credible evidence about the impact and the effect of publishing the Afghan and Iraqi war logs and comparing it to other publications of similar materials in the past. And the prosecution, QC Lewis, doing his best to undermine the witnesses in the methodology of his questioning, in the way he tries to get binary answers, a yes or no, and without letting the witnesses expand. And as we all know, most questions you can't just give a yes or no. You have to qualify it with your experience and your expertise. So the proceedings have dragged on today, and tomorrow will continue with the cross-examination of the defence witness and the defence rebuttal of the prosecution's cross-examination. So we'll be back tomorrow. The supporters of Julian will be here, and just to let Julian know, hopefully, that there are good UK citizens and people from around the world. But it's very difficult here at the Old Bailey because the access is very restricted. Over 40 press organisations were denied the live video link. Reporters Without Borders were denied a press pass to get in the press gallery, and the members of the public have been restricted down to 2. Whereas they did have 5 seats in the overspill court, and now they're saying that there are 3 VIP guests who they're saving the places for, and no one has ever seen. So that is some possible invention by the Old Bailey of non-existent people who they would prefer to have rather than genuine members of the public. People like yourself from Amsterdam and the Netherlands who might want to see what's happening in the court, what's going on in the court, have been denied access. And not just here, but in the Westminster Magistrates Court, where the administrative hearings were for the past year, indeed had similar restrictions on public access and press access. So not a good day for the freedom of press in terms of knowing what's happening inside this Old Bailey criminal court. Amnesty International, indeed, I think along with a few of the other NGOs, have been denied access and been denied the live video link and a reliance on other press and people, witnesses, to report back to them after the court is closed, as it were. Well, especially in the UK and from our near European neighbours and quite a few Australian and American supports here, has been very solid. And if you think of it, it's been a 3-week trial, possibly 4 weeks here. It was a week in Woolwich in February. The support has been fantastic. In February, when we could have travel, unrestricted travel, we had nearly 200 Gilets jaunes from France came to the Belmarsh Woolwich Crown Court. It was certainly an event to remark that the public are the ones that have raised the issue of Julian Assange, not the mainstream media. So without the public, Julian Assange's voice would be completely silent, apart from his legal team.
A really interesting day in the trial, especially because in the afternoon we had a US lawyer by the name of Gary Schenkman. He was very interesting in terms of his understanding of the subject, in particular the history of the Espionage Act. But also what was really interesting about this afternoon trial was, unlike the other witnesses who have been browbeaten by the prosecution into admitting that, the prosecution's line seems to be that these people are not credible experts, or that these people don't know what they're talking about even when they're experts, and therefore there's a limitation to their knowledge. Or thirdly, that they try and get the experts to get to a position where they say that Julian has done something which is criminal. And today in the morning, John Sloboda, a professor, was asked questions. He runs an organization called Iraq Body Count, which was given information by WikiLeaks. And a number of the questions to Professor Sloboda, sorry, I keep muddling up his name, were around why it was that he was given access to this information, how it was that the records were redacted, what he had to see that information, what betting WikiLeaks has done and Julian Assange had done, and if the quality of that betting was sufficient to avoid what the prosecutor argued was jigsaw identification, as in pieces of information put together to be able to identify an informant of the US Army, and then, the US invading forces. And Professor Sloboda explained how Julian Assange had gone to great and rigorous lengths to essentially redact names, but the prosecution went to great extents to say to Professor Sloboda that he had not been correctly vetted by Julian before Julian provided that information, and it is quite weird that they were trying to do, well, not weird, I can understand their logic in trying to do it, but it's quite strange that Professor Sloboda can attest to WikiLeaks' processes, because he doesn't know what vetting they did. Also, he's not somebody who actually redacted the documents, so he doesn't know that either. To know Gary Schenkman, who's a lawyer, very nicely addressed some of the very arrogant and obnoxious questioning from Claire Dobbin, who tried to firstly imply that Mr. Schenkman was not independent, that he had previously been on the legal team of Mr. Assange at a time when Michael Ratner was Mr. Assange's legal counsel. and therefore this was in 2015 when Mr. Schenkman was in the team, and she was trying to say that as a result he was not sufficiently independent. Then she went down various rabbit warrens trying to prove that what Mr. Schenkman was testifying to was that Mr. Assange was engaged in criminal behavior, and he was trying to say that that criminal behavior is excused by the First Amendment, and Mr. Schenkman did an amazingly good job of rebutting that. What was also very interesting was she tried to pressurize the witness at various times into saying various things, and he sorry, this is a bit boring.
Attention all you rule breakers, you misfits and troublemakers, all you free spirits and pioneers, all you visionaries and nonconformists. Everything the establishment has told you is wrong with you is actually what's right with you. You see things others don't. You are hardwired to change the world. Unlike 9 out of 10 people, your mind is irrepressible, and this threatens authority. You were born to be a revolutionary.
Immediate to them, you know what I mean? And of course, what happens now to Julian Assange will play out in the future, because of course everybody's rights and everybody's freedoms are going to be lost, and that's what that's what people don't see.
Shouldn't every journalist in the world be here right now? That's going to affect them, right? I mean,
well, of course. Well, you see, what is journalism? You see, the thing is, I don't understand what is journalism, because here you have the kind of the world's most important political prisoner who's undertaking valid journalism. Yeah, and yet what happens to all the other thousands, tens of thousands of journalists? Why aren't they here supporting it? Yeah, you've asked me, what do they see themselves as journalists and their profession? What is it about for them?
You think they're actually journalists still, or just repeaters of what people want to hear?
Well, I mean, journalism is in crisis, isn't it? It's completely in crisis, and so yeah, you're right. I mean, obviously they just see that people pay them to write the articles, but the people are supposed to read about and supposed to think about. So the journalist is just another cog in the chain. Do you know what I mean? They're just cogging the machine. They're not there to help you to understand the news or to even investigate the news, but they're there just to kind of as propaganda merchants. That's all they do, And if I was a new journalist, I would say, well, why this is not what I'm going to do. I want to be out here, and I want to say yes. This is the principle of journalism. What we're fighting for here is the principle of journalism, and to safeguard the future. And I just think I'd say journalism is in crisis.
Do you think other journalists understand that if Julian gets extradited successfully, that all journalists in Europe can be extradited to the United States for publishing?
All journalists can be jailed for publishing, whether or not they will be extradited to the US. But even across the European Union, all journalists now can be jailed. You know what I mean? Journalism is no longer seen as a legitimate profession. And so, if you publish something that your government doesn't like, then your government can take action against you. And already across Europe, you see journalists getting killed. There was the one in Malta, and then there was the one in Slovakia. These journalists are getting killed. So now, and of course, even if you see what happened in America, journalists are being targeted by the police. So all of these things is happening. Is already happening. And so, obviously, as we go further into this crisis of, the crisis of these, of the modern age, more journalists will become targeted, and it's only those journalists that work for the big publications, the news, the big news corporations, that will feel secure, because all the other journalists will be in fear of their safety.
I have one difficult question. I discussed this with a Swiss lawyer who works in Germany now, and our theory was that perhaps the goal is actually to declare him innocent at the end, and this is a scare tactic to show other journalists what they can do to innocent journalists. So if he gets convicted of, let's say, espionage charges or whatever, and he gets extradited, that's one thing. If he doesn't get convicted and he's innocent, And it means they did all of this to an innocent man, to an innocent journalist. Isn't that a scare tactic in itself?
Of course. Oh yeah, of course. I mean, look, if he gets off, I mean, look, you look at the timing of the trial, got the US elections, you know, so you've got real politics, you know, realpolitik is, you know, is going to play a part. But of course, you know, he has been in prison for 11 years. So of course this is, you know, and you know, rule by fear. And so of course, if you can prevent your prevent journalists from carrying out their lawful activity by threatening them with imprisonment. Well, it's done his job already. It doesn't really matter what happens, you know, to Assange, because he's been in prison for 11 years already, you know. And here we are supposed to live in a democracy, one of the kind of like, you know, one of the top democracies in the world, and yet this is what is happening. So of course, the threat is already there. It is already made.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope that it can be distributed widely, because we do need to get people interested, and people see that they have a common cause with defending Julian Assange. We all do.
Can I just say,
of course,
what's happened to the charters which are supposed to protect this right? The European Convention of Human Rights,
True.
UN Charter of Human Rights, both of them are very, very strong on freedom of speech. But whose job is it to enforce that?
That's a good question, because the UK did sign it. I mean, they signed that charter, and it's outside of the European Union. Even though they left the European Union, there is this European Human Rights Commission that they all signed. They all signed that Human Rights Charter.
There's a video by David Noakes, who was kidnapped, and he is the CEO of Immunobiotech, and he basically says that we've been taken over by criminals, and there is a whole video. And David Noakes was kidnapped. He's now in Fleury-Mérogis in Paris, which is a prison, and Lynn Thayer, who is helping people with stage 4 cancer and being successful. She's working with a non-verbal autistic child, and after I think 4 or 5 weeks of treatment with GC math, it kickstarts the immune system. A child who was non-verbal was speaking again, and she was kidnapped. They did what's called a mental health fraud on her, basically saying, oh, well, you're crazy, we have to get you into a psychiatric ward, and then basically you're disappeared. So Lynn Thayer and David Noakes, they're in Fleury-Mérogis prison, South Paris. I've actually been there twice, outside the prison. It's the biggest prison in Europe. So there's a lot of things. Going back, David Noakes did a video, I have seen the video, saying that basically we do not have a government. The whole thing, they're moving a new world government where we're all basically slaves, and you don't behave yourself, you will get your money chopped off or whatever it is. So that's what I've heard. So the system in China, they're trying to get it all around the planet.
Okay, well,
prove me wrong by all means. And
I always see that the whole digitalization of money. I mean, in China I've seen them even burning cash money, so I'm not surprised by it.
Yeah. But there's a lot of people who've been kidnapped. Ramola D on YouTube, Ramola D report. There's a whole long list of people who've been exploited, who've been disappeared, and that list at the moment is to keep track of all the people that have been come across this system, because some of them have just disappeared. There was a woman, and I was there when she got arrested in Westminster, Marylebone Road. She was camped. She was camped outside the front door of the Westminster Magistrates Court for 3 months. So she must have had a very serious grievance. And I came, said, oh, you didn't appear in court. As far as I know, I got photos, so I put it on Facebook twice. I don't know if her family knows, but she was taken away, so I don't know.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world. Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. For those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
One of the highlights also today here in court was to hear Jennifer Robinson's testimony being read out in the court. Jennifer is, of course, as many of you know, a lawyer for Julian Assange. She was testifying to a meeting that happened in 2017, where she was present, a meeting in the Ecuadorian embassy, where a congressman from the United States, a Republican congressman, David Rohrbacher, attended and had a meeting with Julian Assange, where he claimed to be there with the full knowledge and the acceptance of Donald Trump, putting on the table basically an offer which he described as quote-unquote win-win offer to Julian Assange. The offer that he would reveal the source of the DNC leak in 2015 in exchange for a presidential pardon by Donald Trump. Now, this is important to have on record, and it's important, of course, to understand that it never was a possibility for Julian Assange to accept an offer of this nature. No journalist would ever reveal his sources in exchange for such a favor as was being offered, or even reveal his sources here. And it is important to acknowledge this meeting in the context of the political situation which was happening in the first year of Donald Trump's presidency. It gives you a fuller understanding of the political process that was put in place
after this denial by Julian Assange to accept this offer, we saw a toughening stance and a more rigorous determination by the Department of Justice, both in terms of actions and words, to indict Julian Assange, bringing over the United States, and basically putting him in prison for the rest of his life.
What do you want to say about today?
Well, we've had a week now of including an overwhelming audience all week of Julian and WikiLeaks treasuring, protecting and cherishing, particularly in the redactions and analysis that WikiLeaks underwent until such time as David well, let's not mention their names, until such time as two journalists released the passphrase into the cache of cables, and they were published on John Young's Cryptome. So overall, the intensity of the week was demonstrating the thoroughness of redaction and the care for people and treasuring and cherishing life. Now, Julian stood up. El Masri's evidence is really important. El Masri was a German citizen kidnapped, taken to, I've forgotten where. Anyway, he was kidnapped and taken to the United States. John Goet's investigation revealed that the names of the 13 CIA agents and Munich judge issued an arrest warrant which was suppressed. Julian stood up and said he will not stand by, he will not allow the torture, the witness torture of somebody to be censored, and insisted that the court listen and hear and write down El Masri's evidence. A very noble act. So it was done, and then after that we had an argumentation about whether anybody had ever been persecuted or prosecuted under the Espionage Act. But what I want to emphasise is the entire week demonstrates to anybody willing to hear that WikiLeaks did the redactions, cared and cherished the life of Julian. In his current circumstances, had the ability to stand up and insist that the witness statement of somebody who was tortured be heard in the court. Thank you.
Bravo. Thank you,
John.
There's no new United Kingdom justice system. You are a travesty of justice. The case of Julian Assange extradition is a show case. It's a kangaroo case to intimidate journalists reporting the truth. If we live in a democracy, let the truth to come out. Free the truth. Free Julian Assange. Jail the war criminals. Jail the individuals who commit those horrific war crimes, who torture, who rape, who abuse many innocent civilians in many places across the world. Those criminals deserve to be in jail. Free Julian Assange.
I feel like everyone has suffered enough, like Julian suffered enough, the people have suffered enough, and if you look at the war crimes or think about the war crimes, the victims have suffered enough and Americans have suffered enough, and right now we're at a time where the problems are just different, and even if you take into account, you know, what this case is about, and the concept of what intelligence and the intelligence systems that have been set up in the world, even those things are changing, you know. And just having witnessed the court case on YouTube with the heads of every sort of cyber, you know, technological leaders, from Mark Zuckerberg or Tim Cook at Apple or Mr. Amazon, and then hearing this case within a month's space, and the detailed it's scrutinized at, and every sort of combing of every random tweet that was ever made, you know, and using Wayback Machines to go into every single detail in the scope that it's combed through, compared to how, you know, having Silicon Valley hearing, and how not much was really discussed in detail. It kind of shows where we're at, you know, and who's really in control and what's happening. So I just feel like in that sense, I do have optimism that the world is changing so fast that, you know, hopefully everyone sort of draws the line that, you know, the suffering is been enough, and that we can all sort of move forward into a different phase where we actually have really real relevant issues on surveillance and how we're going to go into the future, and how you know that sort of relates to everybody in the world, not just Americans. I think these conversations are really important, and those need to be had, and I think Julian's an important and an intelligent contribution to those kind of conversations.
Not a single incident has emerged and we point out. And mind you, it's 10 years. Not a single individual has been physically harmed or his life put in physical danger as we know it. And that has not been established in this court, never before anywhere. No harm. And weigh that fact, undisputable fact, against all the harm that has been exposed by the WikiLeaks document. Weigh that together. And if you do that, the entire arguments by the prosecution here just falls flat on its face.
I'm here to support Julian because I don't see enough people in the media supporting him, and I think it's very important that, especially in those days where people are not supporting him in masses, like to be there and support him. And I think, especially in those days where war criminals like George Bush are being publicly supported by a whole fringe of even the left, and Julian is behind bars, and having known Julian for like 10 years now, and having seen the way he's been treated over those last 10 years, is very unfair. So I'm just here to show my support.
Mass media, those who can make you believe in absurdity, can make you commit atrocities. Just one example, the invasion of Iraq based on lies and deceit. And the criminals are Tony Blair, George W. Bush, and allies. And the criminals are walking free. Free Julian Assange, George, the war criminals.
Okay, today we had the prosecution trying to prove that water runs uphill and up is down, with a deluge of detail about the release, the timing of the mass release of the cache of cables. The defence replied and conclusively demonstrated that it was David Lee. We can only conclude from the amount of time that the prosecution spent defending David Lee is that David Lee is a state asset. So anyway, the defence, I don't like to say the defence actually, we progressed and we, I think, moved to the place where the case will be thrown out, that the extradition will fail on the grounds that there is simply no evidence and no means to extradite Julian to the United States.
No extradition! It's only one decision! No extradition! It's only one decision! No extradition! It's only one decision! No extradition! It cannot be the case!
So we heard from a witness, a computer expert, Professor Grothoff, who testified about the timeline that led to the release of the unredacted diplomatic cables in September 2011. It's very important to establish that because how that came about, because at the core of the entire argument here is that WikiLeaks behaved irresponsibly and that the unredacted cable contained names of people that could be harmed, etc. So establishing what really happened before September 2011 is important. And Professor Grothoff was investigated the timeline, what led to that, and came to the conclusion that actually the individuals responsible for that happening were the Guardian journalists Luke Harding and David Lee, who published a passphrase to a very strongly encrypted document with the cables. That happened in February 2011, 6 months before WikiLeaks published. It was known, this irresponsible behavior by the Guardian journalists, which is inexcusable. And actually, even if people read this book, it tells the story of how Julian was so reluctant to give them the password and the documents that he even gave the Guardian journalist only part of the password, but whispered the part that was missing in his ear, because so it was never written down. And then go and actually publish it in a book is totally irresponsible. And that led to a chain of events that at the end of August it was known that the information was out there, the cat was out of the bag. And actually, WikiLeaks was not the first entity to publish these documents.
Thanks for coming. Today was the medical evidence. It was pretty torrid in there. The psychiatrist was examined for 4.5 hours, which I wouldn't like to have to do it. But overall, the view is that we clearly are winning in this battle against the United States, and continuing that sort of appearance, everything seems to me to be a distraction. So we have the Brown University's study, longitudinal study. There are 38 million displaced persons from the 20 years of war. Craig Murray estimates that the dead would be around 4 million people in the last 20 years. These souls that cry for justice, this is a distraction, this great suffering for Julian, but a distraction for us from insisting that these war criminals be brought to justice. That's the sole thing that we must solve after we get Julian free. That these criminals that murder families, mothers, children, fathers, grandfathers, be brought to justice and stop destroying country after country after country. 7 countries in the last 20 years. Thank you.
Testimony from Professor Kobelman, a psychiatrist who has evaluated Julian Assange. I must say that it's very hard, and I want to point out that Ed Fitzgerald, the QC for Julian Assange, pointed out to the media that they would be considerate in reporting on such a delicate matter, and I intend to do the same. But we heard this morning, of course, that Julian has been diagnosed with depression. He is at a high suicide risk, especially if he is extradited to the United States. He has syndrome, Asperger's, that makes him 9 times more likely to commit suicide than other persons. So all this together should give the court the right picture. He is in no state in severe danger of causing self-harm if he is extradited. It was quite, in my opinion, appalling to listen to the lengthy cross-examination by the lawyers for the American government, trying to pick apart every small details, citing records constantly for over an hour from Belmarsh prisons and the medical staff there. The medical staff who obviously have an interest in keeping the records such that the prison cannot be accused of anything if a prisoner self-harms. And we know that Julian did not have full faith and confidence in the people, the medical people in Belmarsh prison, and for obvious reasons. So that sort of sums it up. It's only lunchtime. Professor Kobelman will be cross-examined further by the QC for the Americans this afternoon, and it is quite extraordinary to hear the questions which are indicative of their willingness to try to establish that Julian Assange is simply making it up, which I think is appalling in all respect. But that was what went on this morning. Thank you.
magistrate. Wants to guillotine the case. There was also some amusing statements from the prosecution describing the ADX jails in Colorado, where the warden had described the jails as a place worse than hell on earth. The prosecutor turned himself into a clown trying to describe them as a country club with cricket and tennis and games and all that sort of amusing stuff. So that caused a few titters in the courtroom. Generally speaking, overall, it's clearly, to me anyway, a fraud against the court. And slowly it seems to be coming that the magistrate or the judge in charge is not sympathetic to Julian's circumstances, or in fact any of the circumstances surrounding a free press, extraterritorial application of the United States laws, universal jurisdiction of the universal human rights, any of the great epoch-making universal laws that we operated under until 2001. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Bye.
Yeah, my name is Fidel Narvaez. I was the ex-consul of Ecuador in London. So I attended today the court hearings about Julian Assange extradition. And basically at the end of today, the judge has requested the defense and the prosecutors to make everything possible to finish with these court hearings by the next week. Taking into account that there are still something like 14 witnesses to be cross-examined, and then she wants to allow 1 or 2 more days for the final submissions. The defense clearly opposes to that because they think that there's not enough time to prepare those submissions. There are under a lot of pressure to fulfill with the timeline given by the judge. They complain obviously about the superseding indictment that has arrived at the last hour, and they haven't even processed that in the court. So they are requesting to delay the closing of the hearings at later date. That's not decided yet, but what is clear to me that the judge wants to have this over as soon as possible, and I think that is that is not making justice for Julian for the case. I think the defense needs the time requested to properly submit the final arguments. Coincide en gran parte con el diagnóstico que se le ha dado a Julián de sufrir de depresión, de estar dentro de lo que se llama el espectro de autismo, y él considera que si una persona de esas características sería sometida al régimen presidiario de lo que se llaman las medidas especiales administrativas, Special Administrative Measures, en los Estados Unidos, en total aislamiento, básicamente sin contacto con el exterior, con humanos, el riesgo de suicidio es obviamente más alto. Entonces, lo que se ha demostrado el día de hoy es de que también por las condiciones de salud, también por las condiciones que son el resultado de años de condiciones opresivas, ha llevado a un estado preocupante de depresión. No olvidemos que las Naciones Unidas han dicho que Julian Assange ha sido víctima de tortura psicológica. Lo que hemos visto hoy es la evidencia científica, médica, de que no debería ser extraditado en base a sus condiciones de salud.
If the UK did not throw away the Vienna Conventions the other night, it is because the world was watching. And the world was watching because you were watching.
I mean, the main takeout from today was actually that the final agenda, if to say so, was set. Basically, next week, by the end of next week, next Friday, we will for sure have the last day of the public hearing. Before actually the defense until October 30th will submit in a written way, and I will comment on this with their concluding remarks, giving the prosecution the chance and the opportunity to answer this again written until November 13th. And we, as Reporters Without Borders, see this highly critical and as another attempt actually to undermine the principle of open justice, because the whole hearing actually has been an attempt undermining open justice, limiting and restricting access to the hearing, to this hearing which is of utmost international importance. And that's why we criticize very seriously that actually there's no chance actually for the public to comment on the very day of exchanging closing argument. But it fits into a pattern of this court and of this judge, and that's why we are still here, and we will keep on fighting for the immediate release of Julian Assange, and he has been released. It's what we heard actually this week, because it was a week with mostly medical witnesses, and what we basically, as Reporters Without Borders, take out of this week, I would have to say, that we have to deal here not only with the question of press freedom, but currently as well with the question of life and death, one really has to say, because what we actually heard from the medical witnesses, from the neuropsychiatrists this week, this was really worrying, and that's why we again, as Reporters Without Borders, ask for the immediate release of Julian Assange and for not extraditing Julian Assange to the US.
Just like to take here a privilege and remind this, to keep in mind this one thing, that This whole travesty is to cover 20 years of war crimes. The Brown University released a study, a longitudinal study, that there are 38 million refugees created over the last 20 years by the actions of the United States in destroying Yemen, Syria, Libya, Iraq, parts of Pakistan. 7 nations in total or partially destroyed, with the deaths we estimate of 4 million souls. Now, when I say 38 million, that means mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and children. It's a rule figure. When I say 4 million dead, they are children, mothers, fathers, grandfathers like me, grandmothers, aunties and uncles. They are rural people. And this mass, this tumult of crimes over the last 20 years, reporting them has resulted in Julian, in these 4 weeks trial, of being accused of something that is invisible. You know, it just didn't happen. Julian didn't do anything. They did.
This is Mr. Kemp's description of the medical wing at Belmarsh Prison. Security is on another level here, with 6 times more staff per inmate than the rest of the jail. While in the medical wing, or healthcare, Julian was in effect in solitary confinement, and 3 psychiatrists and a physician with extensive experience of treating trauma have all testified in court that Assange's mental and physical condition deteriorated while he was in healthcare for several months. They also said he improved after he left healthcare, in inverted commas. That says something profound about the healthcare being provided. The same doctors testified that Assange has a poor relationship with Dr. Daly and will not confide his symptoms or feelings to her. And this has also been asserted by the Defence Counsel. This is all essential background to the lies. Now let me come to the lies. Unfortunately, to do so, I must reveal details of Julian's medical condition.
So in my opinion, we are now coming to the end. We have next week, but already now, the entire case against Julian Assange has been torn apart. There is not a shred of evidence here. He should be set out free before this weekend to spend time with his family.
We are here in front of the court last day, Friday, in the 3rd week of the Assange hearing. We today heard an IT expert, a forensic IT expert, who analyzed some of the discussions on Jabber that was between a person we don't know and Chelsea Manning. They assume that the person we don't know is Julian Assange, and the prosecution tries to is part of the prosecution's evidence about Mr. Assange trying to collaborate with Chelsea Manning to hack a computer password to get unauthorized access to a computer system. Let's say that the testimony today was quite technically complicated and challenging to follow. It seems like there is not so much evidence than there's not as much evidence as the prosecution would like it to be there. It was quite interesting to see that they actually would not have been following the expert's opinion, that they would not have been able to crack the password, even if they would have been the most skillful hackers. And we have had some progress today also on the question how to proceed, and if we will be able to finish in the 4 weeks, or if there has to be a 5th week, after the judge before made quite an interesting point when Mr. Fitzgerald for the defense told her that if they have to give the final statements in the 5th week that they won't have enough time to prepare for the next witness testimonies or witness examinations. She told him that that's the situation you find yourself in. She seems to have a change in mind and today decided to grant a month of preparation time, so there will be more time for them to prepare the final statements and to conclude later in the year. So yes, that was today, and next week we will continue.
I mean, legally one cannot separate today from last week, because last week we heard the witnesses on actually the medical situation of Julian Assange and how actually he is currently that he's actually facing the risk of suicide, that he's basically facing hallucination here in the solitary confinement in the UK, in Belmarsh. And what we today learned actually is that how actually pre-trial detention in the US works. From both of the witnesses, both of them confirmed that in the pre-trial detention prisons in the US, it's actually difficult to gain access to specific medical access, psychiatric access, which actually Julian Assange would need, and this actually then would again face actually this would again lead to the reality that actually Julian Assange faces suicide, because this is what we actually learned last week, that this is really a real risk. And if in the US actually there is no medical access really guaranteed in the sense, it leads actually to the one and only reaction that Julian Assange should be released here and today and should not be extradited. But from a legal point of view, today it was interesting as well to listen and to hear that actually the case of Julian Assange on the one hand is the case of Julian Assange, but in the past there have been some rulings of the European Court of Human Rights on how or whether on the US and the situation of prisons in the US and on the difficult situation in the US, and where actually the European Court of Human Rights took a stand on the difficult situation in the US.
As an artist or as a free thinker or activist, I certainly would have trouble when I start to defend human rights, freedom of speech. It happens in China, but I think the case is not limited in China. China is an authoritarian society. It doesn't let the independent thinking or criticism exist. That gets me into deep trouble, but the tactics when they start to trying to hurting Assange is about the same. And you see, first they try to smash him with, to dirt his name, to come out all kind of strange accusations, but the result they think is just put him away, to punish him, and to punish not just him, to send out the signals for all the journalists who want to investigate or who want to give exposure to government's wrongdoings, and that is the same.
Thank you very much. And what will you be doing today?
I come here just simply to show my support to Julian. I think he is a hero. I don't like to use some words, but when you're single and to defend this kind of power, you're a hero, because you're trying to do something impossible, and that's why I come here to show my support.
This morning in court we heard a testament from two experts from the United States who are testifying about the conditions that Julian Assange will face when incarcerated, if he's extradited to the other side. Both pre-trial in Alexandria and in all probability in a supermax prison in Colorado if and when he is sentenced. It was not easy to listen to that. It basically brought back memories about those individuals that we cared about who have actually been incarcerated there in Alexandria in Virginia, and I'm talking about Chelsea Manning. She, of course, was for a very long time held in conditions which were found by the United Nations experts as tantamount to torture. And when you listen to analysis of how these conditions are in Alexandria in Virginia, a jail cell that is 15 square feet. It is about the size of a parking lot, the witness said, and you are held in isolation, and which means basically that you have to spend at least 22 hours every day in the cell. You have no opportunity or possibility to communicate with anybody else. Everything is soundproof. There are steel doors, no windows you can open. So you spend time in the cell almost the entire day, and the hour plus hour you are let outside. They make certain that you don't have any contact with other inmates. To think about these conditions for anybody in pre-trial for possibly up to 2 or 3 years, because everybody admits that it will take a long time to prepare his trial.
Well, we've said from the beginning, and since it's been absolutely clear that Julian Assange would be held under so-called special administrative measures, that this would be an extreme form of isolation. It would be, in effect, a black hole into which Julian Assange would disappear from the moment that he set foot on American territory, unable to communicate properly with his lawyers. His lawyers would be acting illegally if they were to transmit anything that he said to a wider public. In other words, the very last time that you heard Julian Assange's voice would be his last words on British territory.
Do you know Mr. Assange personally?
I do. I visited him when he was in embassy. I visited him when he was in jail, and I visited him when he's in court. You can see each step getting more and more difficult for him. I don't know if I can even visit him when he's in American jail. So, yeah, it's unbelievable.
Do you know how he's doing at the moment? Do you know how Mr. Assange is at the moment? Like his health, how he's doing?
Oh, yes. I think he's intelligent first. He knows what he's doing, and he's prepared to fight. But unless, it's in the fair condition. But this is not fair to him. At first, they trying to smash him with dirt his name, and that put him in such a dramatic situation into that embassy for years. And
And what do you hope happens from here?
What I hope, just free him. Let him to be a free man, just like use billions free men. He's just one of them, and he is truly represents the very core value of why we are free, because we have a freedom of press. We have to have that to protect that value. Otherwise, who knows what's going to happen.
So this morning's witnesses were all about the prison conditions in the United States and the conditions under which Julian would be held if he were extradited to the United States. And the defence witnesses were simply laying out what every sensible person knows about the American prison system, and particularly about high-profile so-called enemies of the state as they're held in that system, the degree of solitary confinement that they would face, the inability to speak properly to their lawyers, the fact that they would have 15 minutes a week telephone conversation with with their partners, and that those conversations would be listened into by the prison authorities. Now, these are extreme punishments.
Okay, today we had in the morning session and the afternoon session 2 lots of witnesses that the prosecution tried to turn their testimony around to declaring that the jail in the United States in the ADX Colorado, which the warden of the ADX Colorado at Florence testifies openly, and she'll be testifying tomorrow, testifies openly that it's like hell on earth, it's death in life. Well, the prosecution spent all day trying to prove that it was like a country club, that it had this facility and that facility, and if you felt a tummy ache, you'd get pills, and if you got a headache, you'd get a psychologist, and so on and so forth. It was really, really quite embarrassing. But just always keep in mind that what this is about is trying to disguise war crimes. Just repeat, understand over and over again. What it is trying to disguise war crimes so that they can continue to commit them against us, just ordinary people. That's who they commit these. They're not brave enough to fight other soldiers. They just attack us with sanctions. 500,000 children died, and Madam Albright says, well, we think it's worth it. 500,000 children. That's 1 million parents.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
I think it was interesting and important to hear that it's difficult under special administrative measures in US prison to gain actually the psychological and medical access which Julian Assange would need, and what we learned from last week's medical testimonies here, that he's really under a high medical risk, under the risk of actually committing suicide. And so this was, I would say, another convincing, to further convincing witnesses, which could and just lead to a decision by the court that actually Julian Assange has to be released out for humanitarian reasons.
It's simply absurd to hear how the lawyers for the United States are attempting to make it sound like this is not a horrible destiny to be transferred to those prison circumstances, both in pre-trial and then post-sentencing in the US. Anything speaks against it. Everything speaks against it. And if you just browse the internet, you will see what kind of measures you're under. You will not have health care. And for an individual like Julian, who comes from a very distressed background after all these years of confinement, given his mental conditions now, it is basically putting somebody to death.
Hi Tracy, hi James. Today it was similar to yesterday. It was about what the situation Julian would find himself in if incarcerated in the United States, either in the ADX in Florence, Colorado, or in the MCC. It's the same jail that Jeffrey Epstein was in when he suicided, if he did suicide. So the example that was worked or given was a man named Abu Hamza, a man with no arms. They're amputated and diabetic and quite mad from being locked up by himself. The prosecution sarcastically said that Abu Hamza had refused to go to court because his toenails were too long. Well, the poor man can't cut his toenails, so anyway, you can imagine what the situation is. There's doors with holes, steel doors with holes in them about the size of your fist. The men yell through those holes. The holes aren't open, but they yell and scream to be heard. So there's howling that goes on in the jail hour after hour as people try, maddened beyond sensibility, to contact somebody, anybody, and voices come back again, yelling and screaming. It's a cacophony of hell. This is the place that they would want to house Julian in. The prosecution insists that it has, ping pong and table tennis and programs. Well, it doesn't. It's just hell. Thanks.
I think the most important testimony this morning were read into the records were from two anonymous witnesses from Spain who have been granted anonymity by the Spanish courts because of a criminal proceedings there, and that was extended to the courts here in London. Those two witnesses are from the company, former employees of the company who were overseeing security in the Ecuadorian embassy, UC Global, and their testimony was shocking. And this was not contested by the lawyers for the opposition, by the US lawyers. The testimony was along the line that the owner of UC Global basically made a pact with intelligence agencies in the United States. This went via a casino magnate in Las Vegas, Sheldon Adelson, who paid the bill, but the information was provided to the Americans and the US agencies. They were spying on Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy with sophisticated techniques that was upgraded. Cameras who were not with microphones were upgraded to include microphones. There were stickers put in the window panels of the Ecuadorian embassy to facilitate the audio recording from laser beamed microphones that the US intelligence had installed outside the embassy and could pick up vibrations from the windows and thereby listening in.
I have been witness in the Spanish case that is taking place in Madrid. I have seen myself enough evidence of the spying. I have seen videos, I have listened to audios, I have seen images of myself, and I have listened to my voice in conversations that nobody told me, and no Ecuadorian diplomat either, that they were being secretly recorded by UC Global for the American intelligence. The whistleblowers today said that they not only backed the inside of the embassy, but they put a special equipment on the embassy windows in order to allow the US intelligence agencies to listen from distance what was happening inside the embassy by using sophisticated laser microphones. All these instructed by the American intelligence agencies. And we even heard today in court that there were discussions about poisoning Julian Assange in order to force him to go out for medical attention. And there were discussions of leaving the door open in order to allow the kidnapping of Julian Assange, which is a crime in itself.
We also heard a testament about what could await Julian if he's extradited, an analysis from the expert on a jury pool in the Eastern District of Virginia, which basically means that the jury pool will be taken from a population where 80% of everybody is either working directly for US government agencies or indirectly through government contractors. So, I mean, there's a reason why the case is prepared there, and the simple reason is Julian will not stand a chance of getting any justice with this kind of jury pool, and actually history supports that nobody gets off if he gets on trial there. There is no justice to be had there. We also heard from Noam Chomsky. His witness statements was read into the court records. His support for Julian and the importance of his courageous acts and the fact that he is doing a public service on a basis of a very clear political ideology.
Various testimonies were read today at court, but for me the most important ones and the most shocking ones were obviously the testimonies coming from the Spanish protected witness that basically are whistleblowers from UC Global Company in charge of the security of the Ecuadorian embassy. They have provided testimony about the atrocious spying going on in the last years in the Ecuadorian embassy on behalf of the United States intelligence agencies. They have denounced that their boss, David Morales, basically in the last 2 years switched sides, make friends with the Americans, and basically started spying for the Americans. They have changed the cameras inside the embassy in order to record audio. They have backed all the embassy with secret microphones in order to record every single dialogue going on in the embassy. They have put special attention on Julian Assange lawyers and on his meetings with his lawyers, which basically invalidates the judicial persecution against Julian Assange, because means that his persecutors were using illegal methods in order to persecute him.
I think that the criminalisation of Assange is a very frightening example of how the powerful Conservative Party or the powerful government in position at the moment controls all media, and anybody who publishes something that they don't like is going to be in trouble. And really all mainstream media now just publishes and parrots the narrative of the government, so they don't report on the truth. They're not good investigative journalists. They don't talk about these illegal wars going on around the world, where America, aided by the UK, enter different countries and with coups and remove their democratically elected governments, such as Bolivia has just happened recently. Evo Morales was the most popular president of Bolivia, who improved the lives not only for the wealthy but also for the poor, the native people. So an improvement all round in education and hospitals, the most loved of all presidents. And he was re-elected. He served 14 years, and yet America went in and took him out and put in their own puppet. They're trying to do that with Venezuela, and it's a disgrace. We need to stay out of other people's countries. If they're rich in natural resources, we need to negotiate with them as anyone else negotiates when you buy and sell, not by going in and toppling their governments and leaving their country in poverty. It's a shameful, one of the shameful acts that has been going on for many years by the powerful US, aided, as I say, by the UK. And this silencing of Julian Assange is a national disgrace.
Bailey, but this is not about me. This is about Julian Assange and the great work that he's done over so many years to find out the truth about so many things and so many issues. And many of us are here today because of what he's done and what he said, and support what he said. This is about freedom. This is about freedom of speech, freedom of the press, which is going and is being lost in our country today, and it's been going and it's being eroded over many, many years. And this is very, very worrying. And it's very, very worrying to me to see someone who just simply stands up for truth, like Julian Assange, being treated like a political prisoner and being put through what is being put through today in the Old Bailey and in Belmarsh prison, being held there for many, many years. I believe this is an injustice. I believe he needs, if he is going to be charged in this country, he should be charged for something in this country and given a free and fair trial, and not being treated like a political prisoner, like someone who is worse than a dog. And that's what's happened to him in this country by the powers that be. Now, I don't know the specific individuals who have let this happen and have pushed for this to happen and are given the order for this to happen. But those people are standing against freedom and liberty, and they're against the people. We're the people, and we're here to say that we're going to stand up for freedom, we're going to stand up for liberty, and we will not stand by silently while someone who just speaks the truth is treated like a common criminal.
You not only stand up for Julian Assange as a human being, but you stand up for yourself, and you stand up for your right to know the truth. Any human being who values themselves and values their right to know the truth will stand up and support Julian Assange. Turn off your televisions. If you switch on the TV, you will likely not hear about the plight of Julian Assange. However, you will likely hear all the crap that the psychopaths in charge want you to know, because it benefits them. If you value your right to know the truth, stand up for Julian Assange, because his freedom is your freedom. If he goes down, you go down. Turn off your television.
Well, I think that these are lies. They're flat out lies. I mean, this courthouse behind me is an imperialist institution. They're not interested in justice. They're not interested in freedom of speech or freedom of press. You know, they go around the planet bombing other countries in the name of democracy, in the name of freedom. They don't even have it right here in the heart of London. This is a joke. I mean, any judge within their right mind, or rather, any judge with a minimum, a shred of integrity, would have thrown this case out on day one, because Julian Assange has been denied the right to a fair trial. He was spied on. We know this for a fact, not just by the UK government allowing this embassy, the Ecuadorian embassy, to turn into a playground, but I mean, the United States has put enormous amounts of money and resources and time and energy to UC Global into collecting and gathering evidence that can be used against Assange, violating his right to a fair trial under the European Convention on Human Rights, under the Interpol Constitution. I mean, there's no way you can look at this and not find enormous legal holes.
Reporters Without Borders has attempted to carry out our job as professional NGO observers at these proceedings the past 4 weeks. We have been unable to do so because this judge has decided not to accept, not to accommodate the role of NGO observers as any different to the public. We have gained access to these proceedings only by fighting our way into court each day with the support of an entire network of activists. This is not how we are accustomed to doing our jobs in any country, and I personally have not experienced this in monitoring any case anywhere. What we have witnessed is concerning. We have documented concerns with regard to Mr. Assange's right to a fair trial. We have serious concerns about open justice, and we retain our concerns about the substance of the case, which we do believe to be politically motivated, as was evidenced quite aptly over the past 4 weeks. We maintain that Mr. Assange has been targeted for his contributions to public interest reporting, and that this case will have historical implications for journalism, for press freedom. That is what is at stake. So it's not just a violation of Mr. Assange's rights, although that is of utmost concern as well. It is a violation of the public's right to information. The public had a right to know what was happening in these proceedings, and very few have been able to gain access. The public also had a right to the information that was published as a result of the leaked information. So that is what I want to leave here to really hammer home for those who are still skeptical about aspects of this case, who may have decided that they believe one thing or the other about Mr. Assange, is that it is the implications for the public, to the public's right to information, for the future of public interest reporting in this country, in the United States, and internationally. So at Reporters Without Borders, we call again for the charges against Mr. Assange to be dropped, for him to be released, and certainly not extradited to the United States. We believe that he should be released unconditionally, but we have also heard ample evidence of humanitarian basis for his release as well. We have said that this could be a matter of life or death, and that cannot be overlooked either in these proceedings. So we will stick with it. We will continue to press the court to reconsider its policy for future hearings, because this is, quite frankly, unacceptable. And we will continue to do our job to the best of our ability.
Approaching the 11th year of Julian's arbitrary detention. 1.5 years under house arrest. 7.5 years locked in a room in the Ecuadorian embassy. And moving to 1.5 years in Belmarsh maximum security prison is a crime. But also I'd like you to consider what the result of leaks and the publication of war crimes. So in 2006, American soldiers in Iraq murdered an entire family. A mother, father, children, uncles, aunties, grandmother. Looking at their crime, they thought of a way out. So they called in an airstrike and destroyed what was left of the children and their mother and father and uncles, grandfather, all of them, obliterated. This was released in the cables. It gave enough insight and courage to the Iraqi government to refuse to renew the status of forces agreement. In other words, a publication of WikiLeaks and Julian stopped a war. So I'd like you to remember that. I'd also like you to keep forever in mind that these heinous deeds can be turned just as easily against us. So if we succeed in carrying upon our shoulders and using our strength to free Julian, it brings that freedom to us, and it prevents him, it gives us the status and strength to resist the murderous crimes of a rogue state and its vassals. And from Julian, when I speak to him on the phone, he asks me to give thanks to the journalists and the supporters. So, from the heart, thanks.
In following these days of trial, we've heard a huge amount of detail that has demolished the prosecution arguments day after day after day. But let's step back now at the end and take a view of the larger picture of what is happening here. Julian Assange has been suffering terrible deprivation of liberty. He's been suffering conditions amounting to torture. His ordeal goes on, and all because he published the truth. There is no allegation in that courtroom that anything he published was a lie. Everything he published was true, and much of that truth revealed terrible crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity, and lies and corruption by government. And not one of the people who committed those war crimes is on trial anywhere. Instead, we have the man who had the courage to reveal those war crimes is the one whose liberty is at stake. And that is not right. And the world must say that is not right. We also had a situation where, at the time he did this publishing, Julian Assange was nowhere near the United States. The United States is claiming a universal jurisdiction to swoop down anywhere in the world and destroy the life of anybody who publishes things it does not want revealed. And this ridiculous claim of universal jurisdiction should not be accepted or tolerated for a moment in a British court, let alone granted all the panoply of justice, so-called, which is defending this indefensible situation. We've also seen the United States government, in prosecuting, argue directly that the First Amendment does not protect journalists. They have argued in detail that the Pentagon Papers judgment would not say the New York Times could not have been prosecuted under the Espionage Act. They are claiming the right to prosecute for espionage any journalist anywhere in the world who reveals national security information. And national security information about a state which constantly invades other states is information which is necessary to the liberty of everyone. We have been here, we have seen the law fighting in the halls of justice, we have seen the activists fighting outside, and this campaign will go on, because the campaign for Julian's freedom is the campaign for the freedom of everyone. Thank you.
Wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and in Guantanamo. Those truths were exposed here. So I ask you, would you not agree that this is not a trial of Julian Assange? In essence, it was a trial of our time and our civilization. Because we heard about all these horrible incidents that happened on our watch and in our name. In a democratic sense. We cannot change the past, but we need the truth about the past. But we can change the fate of Julian Assange. And after all these 4 weeks, we should be in no doubt that there's only one thing that has to happen as an outcome of these proceedings. If Julian Assange is extradited, it will mean darkness for us all. It cannot happen. We must take a stand. There can only be one outcome: no extradition.
The US administration's prosecution is trying to make normal journalistic activities, which are entirely legal in this jurisdiction, an extraditable offense. If he's sent to the United States, Julian will not be able to argue the public interest of his publications, because there is no public interest defense. And because he is not a US citizen, the US says that he does not have free speech protections. The US administration will not stop with him. The US says that it can put any journalists anywhere in the world on trial in the US if it doesn't like what they are publishing. The US administration is exploiting the lopsidedness of the US-UK extradition treaty to deny justice to the family of Harry Dunn and to force cruelty and injustice on ours. This case is already chilling press freedom. It is a frontal assault on journalism, on the public's right to know, and our ability to hold governments, domestic and foreign, to account. Terrible crimes were committed in Iraq and Afghanistan, and terrible crimes were committed at Guantanamo Bay. The perpetrators of those crimes, they're not in prison, but Julian is. Julian is a publisher. Julian is also a son. He's a friend. He's my fiancé and a father. Our children need their father. Julian needs his freedom. And our democracy needs a free press. Thank you.